Hey Nick,
Hey Liam.
did you hear about the two bedbugs that met in the mattress?
No, I didn't hear about them.
They got married in the spring.
Christ.
You know what happens on the bedbug wedding night?
What happens at the bedbug wedding?
Traumatic insemination!
Oh dear.
Mwahahaha. Welcome, mortals, to the Halloween Special of Entocast. Where today, me and Nick are not going to talk in a weird voice for the whole episode because that would be incredibly annoying, but I hope you enjoyed that introduction.
Thank God for that. I was worried then for a second when you started like that. I was like, are we going to be doing this for the whole thing?
I don't think I could keep that up for much longer.
So yeah, as Liam says, welcome to this special Halloween episode of Entocast, as ever sponsored by the Royal Entomological Society. And this time we're talking about creepy insect stories.
That's right. We're going to take you on a brief whistle-stop tour of some of the most disturbing, freaky, creepy insect critters that we have out there, talking about some interesting and horrifying facts.
Ooh, sounds good. Do you want to kick us off with a horrifying insect fact?
I'll start with one of my favourites, because it's got a bit of history in there as well. So my first candidate for a creepy insect is the incredibly not creepy sounding kissing bug.
Okay, it sounds rather pleasant so far.
So yeah, it does sound quite pleasant until you find out that it's called a kissing bug because it has a habit of biting you in the face.
Ah,
So these are true bugs in the family Rejuvidae and in the subfamily Triotominae. And these are, as I said before,
they're a type of an assassin bug, Rejuvidae.
that's absolutely right. Yeah, Rejuvidae is the assassin bug, so this includes loads of creepy insects, some of which we may see later. So specifically the kissing bugs are in this subfamily, and they have a habit of feeding on larger vertebrates mammals. So that also includes humans. And yeah, one of the things I like to do is to feed on the face, and especially the soft parts like the lips, which is where they get the name kissing bug, which is not great at starting point. You know, we're not going to be best friends with this insect, but it gets worse because not only are they doing this, they also are vectors for Chagas disease.
Oh, excellent.
So this is a disease also known as American trypanosomiasis. I hope I said that right. It's actually caused by a protist which lives inside of the gut of the kissing bug.
Like malaria.
Exactly, yeah. It's kind of similar, except for it's not transmitted in the salivary gland of the insect like malaria is in the mosquito. It's actually the bug bites you and then produces feces, and it's in the feces that the process gets there. So then the act of scratching the bite can kind of smush the feces into the wound and then cause infection. Now, once you get infected with Chagas disease, you get kind of short-term symptoms, which are not very pleasant. Things like fever, headaches, swollen
Swollen lymph nodes?
swollen lymph nodes. I was going to say nymph because I had bugs on the mind.
Yeah.
Swollen lymph nodes. So swollen lymph nodes. And then 70 to 60% of people, that'll be it. They'll just get this nasty disease, but then they shall recover. However, in 30 to 40% of the population which are infected, they then develop symptoms much, much later. So this can be 10 to 30 years later.
Blimey.
So, yeah, once you've had it once, it's kind of something that could affect you potentially a long way off later in your life. And these are more serious symptoms, which kind of not noticeable at first, but then can cause some major problems. One of the prominent ones of these being enlarged ventricles in the heart, which that can actually lead to heart failure, which is, you know, not great.
Putting it lightly.
Yeah. And so it's these symptoms and the habits which has led to quite an interesting theory. And you may have heard that Charles Darwin was kind of known later in life to suffer from this chronic illness, and nobody knows what it was. And looking at the symptoms related to Chagas disease has led to some people to kind of hypothesize that it was actually Chagas disease that he had. And this is kind of backed up and supported by an account that he wrote from his voyages on the Beagle. So whilst he was in Chile in 1835, he describes in detail a kind of horrific encounter with kissing bugs, where he woke up in the night with them actually feeding on his face.
Right.
So people have kind of put two and two together. They've taken this into, they know he was bitten by this group, and then they've looked at the symptoms that he's got, and they said, well, yeah, it could actually be Chagas disease. Unfortunately, we have no way of knowing for sure without kind of taking up his remains and testing them, which scientists have actually applied to do. But the guy in charge of the place where his remains are kept wasn't so keen on the idea. So at the moment, it still remains a mystery, but I think it's quite an interesting story.
That's a shame as well, because I bet Darwin would have liked to know. I reckon he'll be up for having his remains exhumed. Who knows? I'm not going to lie, I did somewhat struggle doing the research for this. I found most of the stuff that I found on the internet, which is always a great resource, was largely people just telling stories of when they were scared of an insect or just like they don't like spiders. Like, shockingly, as it turns out, people don't like spiders. Who knew? I mean, it may have been because I was relying on BuzzFeed for my research, because I'm a good researcher, but
As long as you don't do that for your actual PhD research.
No, but I had a little bit of a struggle just wading through all of that to find this stuff. And a lot of what people were scared of were just insects that were huge, like just Goliath beetles and giant wetters, and like, insects should not be that big. I am scared.
The ones we covered in the first episode.
Exactly. So I did struggle a little bit. So what I've done is I found insects that are genuinely quite creepy. They do kind of creepy things. But personally, I just find them kind of cool, like the things they do.
Yeah.
So it's funny that you were talking about assassin bugs, because I was looking at assassin bug in Malaysia. I can't pronounce the common name because it's Malaysian, but it is Acanthaspis pitax.
Yeah.
And that's just why Latin is useful, folks. And it is an awesome insect because it digests insects from the inside out, which I find really cool. So it stabs them with its rostrum, and then it injects enzymes that cause the insides of the insect to be digested. Then it sucks them straight up. But then it's not done there. It's not just done when it's done that. So it's got this exoskeleton that's left because it sucked up all the inside, all the nutrients and things. And it's got this exoskeleton left. And what's an insect to do with an exoskeleton? Well, this guy, Acanthaspis, he just puts it on his back and uses it as like some makeshift armor. Like, I just thought it was really cool. But it is kind of like if I were like a warrior in the past and I wore like the skulls of my enemies or something like that. So, yeah, it was a little bit strange.
Yeah, absolutely terrifying. I actually looked into this one, and I found there was actually some researchers are trying to work out exactly why it put these ant corpses on its back after it's finished sucking out their insides, as you said. And there were a couple of different theories, but they found out basically by putting them in arenas with spiders and allowing some to glue them on their back and some to not, that it actually massively reduced the amount of times that the spiders would attack them.
Okay.
So actually, by gluing on, and it's primarily ants they do it with, even though they'll feed on all sorts of stuff, they tend to favour gluing the ant bodies on their back. So some people say, well, maybe it's the smell of the ants, because a lot of predators won't attack ants because there's loads of them, and then, you know, social defence of the colony, it might not end up so well for the predator. And another theory was it breaks up the outline and changes the shape of the bug to make it look like something which isn't prey.
Yeah.
So the spiders look at it and say, well, it kind of looks like a bug, but what's all this weird thing on its back? Maybe I shouldn't be attacking that.
Most of what I found was they were trying to use it as some sort of camouflage, but no one was very clear at all on why it does it. But I just thought it was
Seriously cool.
seriously cool and
Definitely creepy.
Definitely creepy.
Another kind of cool, creepy insect. It's a personal favourite just because I just love the idea of this life cycle. It's something that's known as an ant decapitating fly. I mean,
Well, it's got a great name to start with.
Absolutely. So this is Pseudoactyon. It's a genus of small, tiny little flies. And these are found all over the place, but the one in particular that I'm thinking of is found in South America and also Central America, and I think southern United States also have them. And these are parasitoids on fire ants, which is quite interesting in itself because fire ants have become invasive in North America. So it's quite interesting seeing which species of ant decapitating fly attacks which species of fire ant. But yeah,
When
so
you put it like that, it's quite interesting to see which one decapitates which. It sounds kind of vicious.
well, the manner which they do this is absolutely fantastic. So what happens is you have the adult flies, and they'll find the ants, and I believe I'm right in saying they actually do this by locating the ants' alarm pheromone. So they search out terrified ants and then just hound them some more. And they kind of they're very good flyers. They, in a way that they actually hover close to the ant, just out of reach, kind of lining up their final attack. And then when they're ready, they'll dart in, and each species has a unique shaped ovipositor, which is perfectly shaped to get in between the segments of the ant's exoskeleton. And it then quickly injects an egg with a hypodermic-like ovipositor into the ant's body before, quickly flying out of the way again. And the ant's like, whoa, what just happened? And the spot they usually go for is in between the legs on the side. So anyway, the egg goes in, and then over the next few days, the egg increases in size and then hatches. And then the larva of the fly begins to feed on the ant from the inside. The ant, meanwhile, just kind of carries on its daily business until the larva kind of migrates up into the ant's head. But keeping it alive as long as possible, because it's more beneficial to feed on a living host than a dying, decaying host. And then it proceeds to, by chemical means, slowly influence the ant's behaviour. So normally an ant would go about its day-to-day business, do some work in the colony, but then may go out and do foraging. But if an ant's got one of these larvae inside it, the larva makes the ant stay inside the colony where it's nice and safe until it's ready to pupate, in which case it will then tell the ant to go away from the colony and then find somewhere like damp and dark, which is the perfect environment for it to start to pupate. Then when it's ready, it decapitates the ant from the inside, so it degrades all the membranes which hold the head on, and then the ant's head literally drops off with the larva snugly inside a nice little cocoon, which it can then spin its own cocoon to pupate. Before it does spin this cocoon, it ensures it has an exit porthole, so it cuts a hole in the front of the ant's, basically its mouth, and then pupates, and then when it's ready, the adult fly emerges ready to repeat the process all over again.
So that's really cool. That's really interesting. It actually leads on really well to another insect that I was interested in, which also has a kind of mind control. So this is the jewel wasp, or the emerald cockroach wasp, Ampulex compressa. And this is a wasp that preys on cockroaches, but it doesn't do so in a conventional way. So what it does is, when it finds a cockroach that it's decided, you look like a good place to lay my eggs, it will sting them and paralyze its front legs, mostly so it can't resist what's going to happen next, because what it does next is it positions itself on the cockroach and stabs its stinger right into the head of the cockroach, injecting into the brain. What it does at this point is really, really cool. So it actually injects some neurotransmitters, and they block this chemical called octopamine. And this octopamine chemical is what gives insects and other organisms the motivation to walk. So suddenly the cockroach has the ability to walk, but it has no motivation to do so. So why does it do this? Well, it's because of what it does next. The wasp then drags the cockroach to its nest, and then it will lay its eggs inside of it, and then they can feed on a fresh cockroach, because a dead cockroach will go off quickly, not great to eat, but a fresh live cockroach, wonderful to eat. I also found a really cool video where you can see it doing exactly this, and I'll link to that in the show notes. But yeah, insect mind control, creepy or what?
Yeah, I just love it because it's such a creepy, horrible lifestyle. But if you look at this wasp, it's just so stunningly beautiful with the bright metallic colours.
Yeah, no, I think I actually linked to, I think it was the picture I put. Yeah, the picture I put in the wasp episode was this wasp, which just because I was like, that's a pretty wasp.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely love mind control, and there's a whole bunch of examples of different organisms which kind of take advantage of the neurochemistry of other organisms for horrific ends. Another one of my favorites is one of the classic ones. I'm sure many of our listeners would have heard about it before because of the shocking title that it's kind of been given, but they're the zombie ants and the fungus which takes over there. And it's a kind of a similar thing where an ant's just going along its daily business, nice and happy, and then accidentally ingests some spores from this fungus, not really know much about it. And then all of a sudden it starts to behave a bit weird. And what the fungus does, it starts to grow in the ant, particularly in the brain, not actually infecting the brain, but just growing in the area of the brain around the neurons. And then we're not exactly sure how it does this, but what it basically does is it makes the ant start to behave as if it was drunk. So it's kind of staggering around all over the place. And sometimes some ants have evolved social immunity. So as soon as they spot a member of their colony doing something a little bit weird, they're like, hang on a second, Barry. Are you infected? Are you infected? And they'll take them outside and...
This genuinely sounds like what happens when your friend does too many drinks. Like, Barry, are you okay? Well, let's get you outside, away from everyone else, Barry.
Yeah, but when it's your friend who's had too many drinks, you're doing it for a nice reason. These ants are doing it for horrible. They're like, you're infected. We don't want to be infected. You're out. You're going to go die outside alone.
Right,
now.
I see. That's a little bit more grim.
Yeah, and then the fungus will continue to kind of influence the ant's behavior, and it's better for the fungus if it can be undetected until it's ready to start producing its own spores and transmit again, in which time it will make the ant start to climb up a nearby plant, and it will climb up to a point, and then usually on the underside of a leaf or at the top of a stem will make the ant bite on really hard. And then the fungus actually produces chemicals which atrophy the ant's jaw muscles. So once it's made this, and they call it the death grip, so once it's bitten into the plant, it can then no longer has the ability to unbite, so it's just stuck there.
Blimey.
Yeah, during which time the fungus continues to grow, and then this huge sprout grows out of the back of the ant's head, and it produces this big long stalk, and then on the end the spores are produced. And because it's got the ant to climb up and bite on above, it's the perfect position for the fungus to then release spores and get the maximum dispersal, where they're likely to be picked up by other helpless ants, to which will probably undergo the same fate.
I think that's sort of an inspiration for a zombie movie right there. Fungus infects man. Although I don't know if zombies would be as scary if they had a great big fungal stalk growing out of their heads. They're probably
or if they bit onto trees really hard.
You just have this temptation to climb up a tree and bite it. Probably wouldn't be as scary. It'll be fun though. So we've talked about a few insects here that have got kind of creepy life cycles, but mostly they've had kind of creepy life cycles around other insects. So one thing I do want to touch on is something that's kind of creepy for humans, and you'll probably be able to guess what I'm about to say. Botflies.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Dermatobia hominis. Hominis, human.
Human botfly.
So these are horrendous, as the only way I can really describe it. I unfortunately decided to do a Google image search at one point for this, and was... I would say I wasn't disappointed, but I don't think I was exactly happy about the situation that occurred once I did that.
I definitely urge our listeners to try it.
Yeah, if you are over the age of 18, I recommend you try it. Otherwise, ask your parents, honestly.
Hey, it's Halloween.
It grossed me out when I'm 25. So butterflies have got a really fascinating life cycle. Hominis particularly has a very interesting life cycle. Maybe because it impacts us, but also because, you'll see. So, first thing that happens is the adult females will grab onto mosquitoes and lay their eggs inside of them, which is kind of like a cool thing and kind of a creepy thing to do in the first place. But that's fine, it's just in the mosquito. Mosquito's got some eggs. But then when the mosquito finds a human, it will land on the human, and due to the temperature change caused by the human's body heat, the eggs will then hatch, and as the mosquito bites the human, the larva will wriggle inside the wound where the human has been bitten, and then they'll stay there for a while, and kind of grossly, they just feed on sort of the leftovers from our tissues. So you have all these tissue exudates that they just feed on, and then they grow underneath your skin. So you can have like these wriggling bumps underneath your skin, and they can grow up to like probably a good few centimeters in size. So it's not insubstantial at all. And the worst thing is, you can obviously see it's there, you can see it wriggling about, it's feeding on you. That's all terrible. But then when you actually try to get it removed, the damn thing's covered in spines. Like, this thing is vicious. So yeah, it's a little bit of a pain to remove. I also found a video for the brave of our listeners where you can see one of the larvae removed from a girl's scalp, which is not a nice place to have a fight.
I've heard about people who've had them on their head, and I've heard stories of people being able to hear a scraping noise as it's feeding away on top of their head and causing vibrations. Yeah, not pleasant.
Not pleasant. And honestly, these are so horrific, I may cut this whole segment from the show.
So we've had zombies, and we've had kind of vampires, if you like, with the kissing bugs, and we've had decapitators. So
flesh eaters.
Yeah, flesh eaters. So I think next maybe we could talk about a mutant.
Ooh, okay. Sounds interesting.
So I'm being very kind of liberal with the use of the word mutant here. Mm-hmm. But I'd like to talk just briefly about the Africanized honeybee.
Oh, okay. That's not where I thought you was going.
So this is not mutated in the sense of it's undergone a mutagen.
Yeah, I was kind of imagining like 50s B horror movies where like there's gigantic ants and stuff because of radioactivity.
Yeah, no, a little bit more science fact than that. So they tried to develop a new strain of honeybee, which was more productive in honey production and also able to cope with tropical climates better. So this led through a cross of the European honeybee, Apis mellifera, and the African honeybee.
Sounds sensible so far.
Yeah, and it did work in the sense that it is a very productive strain of bee. It produces an awful lot of honey, and it can cope with the tropical climate. Mm-hmm. However, the unforeseen kind of side effects is it's incredibly aggressive. In fact, it's known to have up to 5 times more guard bees than the normal European honeybee.
Wow.
So these are bees who are kind of on guard, on duty, ready to defend the colony at signs of trouble. So if you imagine there's 5 times the time of those, it's kind of showing just how more aggressive this strain of the species is. And it's known that they are far more easy to provoke a aggressive response from this strain than it would be from the European one. And not only that, the entire hive will tend to pour out and attack anyone, even if you're not even interfering with the colony, if you're just in the vicinity. And there was a man who survived somehow, but he provoked one of these colonies and he had over 2,000 stings. So if you normally provoke a European honey colony, you probably end up with about 30, 40, 50 stings. So
if you're unlucky.
Yeah, and that would be really, really bad one.
Yeah.
But this, 2,000.
That's almost enough to cause like a lethal shock or something.
Well, it did. It caused multiple organ failure. Somehow he survived, but many people don't. In fact, actually, it's kind of predicted that thousands of people have been killed by these bees. And the reason they're out there is because, they developed this strain and then they saw, actually, it's really aggressive. This might not be a good idea. But unfortunately, it escaped. But in some parts of the world, they are actually kept. People do keep them because even though it's such a risk to have these, well, it's frankly dangerous bees, they are more productive. So in some less developed tropical countries, people do keep them or tolerate them.
How do they collect honey though? From a bee like that, how do you even begin?
No idea, but I know that people who've researched on them have to wear special bee suits because the normal ones can't hack it, and these ones have like a metal mesh instead of a cloth one, because the force of the bees flying into a normal bee suit can kind of push the suit closer to the skin to the point where the bees could then sting. So yeah, they're pretty crazy bees.
Yeah, you're not kidding. Well, that leads on nicely to what may be a solution I don't know. I think I'm being a bit generous with the word, but another aggressive hymenopteron. Anyway, so have you heard of the Asian giant hornet?
Oh yes, I've seen the Daily Mail.
Yeah. Well, fair point. Fair point. Well, a particular subspecies of the Asian giant hornet, the Japanese giant hornet.
Vespa mandarina japonica.
Yep, that's the one. This is the subspecies, surprisingly, found in Japan. And these guys, they just love killing honeybees. Like, they just massacre them like it's going out of fashion. So I was just thinking when you were talking about that, maybe we could just, like, have the battle of the hymenopterans and have the Africanized honeybees versus
Now that
these
would make
guys.
a good bee film.
That would be a good bee film. Better than the Bee Movie. You want to have a truly terrible time on Halloween? Watch the Bee Movie. So they're native to Japan, and they live a balanced relationship with the local Japanese variety of the honeybee. They do try and invade their nests and steal from them, but equally those bees can normally defend against them. However, Japanese farmers have started using the European honeybee, and this is where things get a little bit gory. Like, these guys, the European honeybee, basically have no defense against this hornet. So it just massacres them en masse. So what it'll do is it'll use pheromones to get teams of hornets to converge on one honeybee hive, and then they chop them up to feed to their offspring. But they will do it at a rate of knots. So apparently they kill around 30 to 40 bees per minute, which is an insane number of bees. I couldn't find a necessarily reliable source, but a lot of times that was the number that was doing. And that amounts to around 30 to 40,000 bees per hour. That is an entire hive that they could kill in a couple of hours. It is insane the rate that they do it. And they just, I'll link to a video, but they just literally rip these poor bees apart. Like, they just have no chance. But as I said, the native Japanese honeybee can defend against the guys. And the way they do that is really interesting. So when the hornet approaches their hive, they will, the guard bees will tell everyone else, and then they will hide. Let the hornet enter into the hive, and then they will form a ball of bees around the hornet. And then through muscular exertion, they heat up the hornet, and they also decrease the levels of CO2, and they just bake the hornet alive, which is such a cool defense mechanism, but also kind of creepy. So you've heard about what we think are kind of creepy insects. I mean, mostly, I'm not gonna lie, I think it's the same for you, Liam. I just found these guys cool.
Yeah, I wanted to watch videos and learn more.
Yeah, it was. With the possible exception of the botflies, I thought they were all really cool.
You say that, I do know entomologists who'd be quite happy to have a botfly in them just because they're interested.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they're not especially lethal. It's just horrible.
Yeah, maybe they will say they want to experience it, but then after a few days, be like, get this thing out of me.
Yeah, I can't imagine. It feels a bit like Alien-esque with like the bump growing under your skin. But another thing I just wanted to talk about quickly was something that I found really cool in my research. So, are you familiar with the Halloween family of genes?
No, tell me more.
I was not familiar with them either, but Googling Halloween and insects, this is the sort of stuff you come up with. So these are a bunch of genes that were found in Drosophila, and they're cytochrome P40s. And what that is, they're involved in the synthesis of the insect molting hormone 20-hydroxyexadisone, which is also to do with diapause regulation and various
Very
other
important.
things. It's very, very important, and it was found in Drosophila. And in Drosophila, they have a bit of a weird way of naming things, which is basically, what does Drosophila look like? That's how we'll name it. That's how you end up with like weird sounding genes like topless and things like that. So what we have in Drosophila are the Halloween family of genes, and they have the most amazing names. So the individual genes themselves are called Phantom, Disembodied, Shadow, Shade, Ghost, Mummy, Haunted, Spook, and Spookier.
Spookier, I love it.
Which is just absolutely fantastic. So I came across these guys and I was like, why would you name them Halloween genes? Like, and the names make no sense. How does it ever look like a phantom? So I looked into it, and there was a guy called Christian Nuslin Rohard, from the Max Planck Institute. I probably mangled your name, I'm sorry, because you won a Nobel Prize, so you deserve more respect than that. And he was the guy who named the first few of these genes after noticing some of the grisly effects that they had on the Drosophila mutants. So it's common in Drosophila research to just knock out random genes and see what it does. This was especially true at the time that this research was being conducted. So when they knocked out these genes, the first genes they knocked out were disembodied, haunted, and mummy. So they knocked them out and they caused the cuticle to not form properly on the larva. So what happened was, it's weird, and I'll put some pictures in the show notes because it's easier to see. But essentially, because the cuticle wasn't forming properly, the disembodied mutants, so these are the ones that have disembodied knocked out, there was no differentiation of cuticle and head skeleton. So they basically had like sort of a weird no head, which was very, very creepy. Haunted mutants were worse because they had the head skeleton visible. So the cuticle didn't form, but the head skeleton did. So you just had like this head skeleton sticking out, which was kind of weird looking. And in the mummy mutants, the mouth parts and denticles were poorly differentiated. So it ended up kind of looking like a mummy that had bandages wrapped around it. So yeah, they came up with these first few. So he named them without really thinking about them. In an interview, he said something like, "Oh, I just didn't think about it, I just named them." Is how you name things in Drosophila.
It was probably October.
Yeah, probably October. And then Michael O'Connor from the University of Minnesota found loads more of these mutants from the same family, and he kept the naming tradition going, and eventually they just named the whole family Halloween, because with names like disembodied, haunted, mummy, stuff like that, it's a good thing to name a family of genes, and it definitely sticks in people's head. But it must be weird if you were a Drosophila researcher coming across these genes with no idea why the backstory is like, what? So they knocked out haunted, and then what? So he kept that naming tradition going, and apparently he's a big fan of Halloween as well, Michael O'Connor. He dressed up once as a parasitic mite of Drosophila because it's terrorized his lab cultures so often.
There's nothing scarier than when your cultures get infected.
So I thought that was just a little fun story to tell,
Yeah.
sort of a Halloween-related one about it. Sort of a bit of a contrast to what we've just been talking about, but it was just something cool I came across when I was researching this.
I think that's all we have time for today. I hope you've enjoyed our special spooky Halloween episode with some creepy stories to keep you awake at night.
Or hopefully not. Hopefully you just think they're as cool as we do. But if you are of a squeamish disposition, sorry. That's all I can say. But it's been really fun to make this episode, and we'll be back again next month. Thank you again to the Royal Entomological Society. Don't forget, you guys, to subscribe and all that other stuff, like our Facebook, follow us on Twitter, all that sort of thing. But we'll be back next month when we'll be talking about my research. But thank you all for listening. Goodbye.
Bye.
Mwahahaha. Test number 2. Can you hear me now?
Test number 2. Were you expecting me to say something funny?
Yeah, probably.